I love that line, the art of the possible, because I think so much of this moment in time is about optimism and about imagination and not resting on laurels. This presentation is called Betting Big on Radical Innovation. It really is about the art of possible and about avoiding incremental change and really dreaming big. It's going to be quite fast. No one has an attention span these days, least of all me. So this will be very high paced, but you will get copies of this. And it is videoed, as Sonia mentioned before, so you can look back on it in case you missed things. I'm going to start unconventionally with talking about cargo shipments. No one is expecting me to talk about this. This is what cargo ships look like in the era of wind power. Someone invented the steam engine and boats changed quite radically to look like this, and everything was different and they were technologically superior, but there was still a big problem. And that's that everything was stored individually. It took a really long time to unload the boats. You had to have massive warehouse complexes. And actually, steam engines didn't change boats that much. Like, they weren't that much faster. They allowed very incremental changes to the world of shipments. It was actually this guy, a guy called Marshall McLean, who was a truck driver. He was a very rich truck driver, but he got extremely irritated with how long it took him to wait at the ports. And he invented this thing called the container, which was simply an aluminium box. And he invented a system of storing it on boats. And this actually changed everything in the world of cargo, because all of a sudden, large ships made a lot more sense. All of a sudden, everything could be turned around much more quickly. The economies of scale radically transformed. Port infrastructure radically transformed. The entire world economy radically transformed simply because of an aluminium box. And this is what ports look like today: vast, messy infrastructure that's incredibly efficient and has completely transformed the world. You can look here at the way that sea freight costs have come down, not lately, but over the long term, they have absolutely plummeted by around 80%. And it's this, you could argue, there's a graph, so it must be true. It's this that led to the entire globalization of the world. And that's why we can go to China and still buy the same shampoo. We can go to Panama and enjoy a nice Starbucks. The entire world has been changed by something incredibly boring like the container. Now, the late Clayton Christensen had a lovely theory called technological disruption. And with all due respect, as time goes on, it's proven to be absolute nonsense. One would imagine that the steam engine is what changed shipping. One would imagine it was about technology. One would imagine it was about something that was cheaper. And actually, this was simply about the power of ideas. It was simply creating a better system. And it was actually something that was incredibly simple rather than complex. There are other lessons we can take from the container. We can take the fact that it was an outsider that transformed the industry rather than someone that was in it. We can take the fact that the business case for change was very hard, because up until the container, no one had really seen that was a problem to solve. But the thing that I really want to take from it is the container only really made a difference when we changed ports and when we changed the way that items were stored and when we changed the crane infrastructure. And so often when we talk about transformation, what we're really talking about is adaptation. What we're really trying to do is sprinkle through new technology rather like an oil to an existing machine, where we need to think of it much more like this platform to rethink everything, to build things from scratch. And it's that way of thinking, it's that imagination, it's the art of possibility where things really get exciting. Today is a presentation of two parts. I'm going to talk at you quite quickly for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 15 minutes worth of interrogation, I think, with Sonia, and then a 15-minute open Q&A. So hopefully this will keep you interested. Tiny bit about me. My role is to understand the change in the world that matters. What is profound and what is a distraction is my job. And then to help companies really change. And I mean significant changes that affect the P&L rather than the appearance of change or the art of distractions. I do that through an entity I've set up called All We Have Is Now. And I believe in change through provocation. So if I make you feel annoyed, I'm doing a good job. I do that through optimism because there is a lot to be happy about. And optimism is a great way to come up with good ideas. And I do it through clarity because life is confusing enough without people saying nonsense. There are two themes I want to introduce at the start of this session. Two foundational elements, which I hope will provide you with guidance and context to think about the world. The first is this rapid pace of change, the storm clouds of change that are around us. I love this idea of doing something called a change safari. Now we're allowed to leave our apartments and we're allowed to explore the world. You can go around and you can look for signs of change. This is me last week in London. This is not going to change the world, but it's amazing how many scooters there are outside this school. It was almost impossible to walk down this pavement without tripping up on a scooter. I came back to Miami. There's this little, I think it's called a drone. It's a kind of delivery robot which crawls along the street looking incredibly vulnerable. I then had a meal. It was rather expensive. We can talk about inflation another time. But I could pay this bill using a QR code. You can see all this change appearing around the world. I went to a shopping mall and they had something called a selfie museum. I don't even know what a selfie museum is, but I think I don't like it. And then I turned on the TV. You don't even have to leave the house. And you can see that IBM Watson is predicting a very close match in the Wimbledon final. We can see that AI is taking over our lives. It was not remotely accurate, by the way. This was wildly off and against all known knowledge of tennis, but it was very sophisticated. And I read the other day about a 3D printed home. This is a Dutch couple who bought a 3D printed home. We can clearly see the world is changing at a very rapid pace, but is it? I think it's a technical term I'm using here. The pace of change is meh. I'm not convinced we are living in a period of enormous, profound change that's happening faster than ever. The world has gone through incredibly turbulent patches. The 1930s saw the stock market devastated. The advent of steel changed cities forever. The car radically transformed the world. The aircraft, the jet engine. We've lived in periods of amazing change. And if you go outside, for all of the 3D printed houses that may be promised, most people still live in places like this. You go to a shopping mall, there are no drones flying around, there are no 3D printed objects to buy. Shopping malls look pretty much like they've always looked. You go to the office, which apparently is transformed and will never be the same again, but we're using more paper than we've ever used before. And then you get the Pfizer vaccination, you get it twice, and $1 trillion project to transform the world through vaccination still comes down to a piece of card where the person forgot to write my name on it, so I had to do it myself. And I'm not being miserable. I'm just saying if you look for signs of change, you can see them. If you look for signs of continuity, you can see lots of them. And that should provide us with reassurance. What we really live in is this age of incredible distractions where we're told that 5G will change everything, but they're not really sure how. We're told that voice will change everything, even though it just appears to be an alarm clock. We're told that AI will change everything, and everything is blue. And everything looks futuristic and everything has robots. But what is the meaning of this stuff? What does AI even mean? Is it augmented intelligence? Is it artificial intelligence? How do we define it? I think we're living in this age of enormous distractions. So it could be blockchain or it could be NFT. The only thing we figured out how to do with NFTs is to make movies about NFTs. That's how boring the technology is. It's basically a form of digital rights software. Who cares? What we really see between the sort of distractions is we see this enormous tension, because 1 minute we're using Uber and we can read the biography of the driver. We can see where they are in real time and we can probably follow them on Facebook and we can see what people think of them. And the next minute a white van comes and we don't know where it is and it's late and the window it's going to arrive in is about 5 hours long and it still doesn't turn up and we can't even phone them. We live in this era of sort of digital tension where the promise of technology is so huge, but the reality of what we have every day is not really improving, and it just makes us feel quite frustrated. And you realize the entire foundations of today are not really designed for the future. You can move into a brand new multi-story building and the package room will still be far too small, because it's as if we didn't know that e-commerce was going to be a big thing 20 years ago. It's as if we're not changing the foundations on which society is built. There are so many aspects of modern life, the notion of retirement, the notion of pensions, the notion of taxation, the notions of regulation, which are not fit for the future. And it's that which is creating the tension. It's not the pace of change, it's the reluctance of organizations to change. And the tension builds every day. And this is wonderful news because it means you are not screwed. If you have not changed things, you are probably fine. Now is the perfect time to think about technology and new behaviors and what you can do. And you are not too late. And you can be a little bit happy and relaxed about it even. And the future is not wildly unpredictable. E-commerce has not come from nowhere. Mobile phones have not suddenly entered our lives. We don't need to do this whole agile, panicky, everything is nuts, everything is crazy, chaotic thing. We can just make a sensible plan for the future. I think Ludwig belongs to an organization called the Future Fit Manifesto. It's all about making sensible plans for the future because it's not wildly unpredictable. And even when we go through periods of crazy, unprecedented change for a fairly short period of time, things probably will emerge at the end being rather similar to they were before. The second thing I want to mention is this idea of the huge battle that we face. This is a rather dramatic simplification, but almost every industry is facing the battle between the incumbent and the insurgent. And the incumbents normally know what they're doing. They know how to operate in an industry. They have succeeded for decade upon decade upon decade. And then the tech companies come in and they change things and they challenge things and they work around new emerging behaviors. They have a data strategy at the core. They have really nice websites. They may even have an Apple Watch app. And it's this battle between BMW and Tesla or Samsonite and Away or Regis and WeWork. It's this battle that you can feel. And what we really have is different standards that these companies are being held to account for. So a company like Instacart or Wish or Oyo or WeWork, it's all about user growth. They have access to very cheap capital. They can grow their user base very quickly. It's all about the addressable market size. How big could Tesla be if it becomes an energy company? And in this world, these companies are held to account not by profit, because taking a profit is simply a lack of ambition. We've learned from Amazon that taking profit just means you don't believe in yourself. These companies are held to account only really by user growth. And then we have these poor old-fashioned companies that make tons of money, and they're held to account by revenue growth every quarter and profit growth every quarter. And by all accounts, they seem to do this rather miraculously. But yet we're in this weird world where somehow we're supposed to be looking at these tech insurgents and being jealous. They feature on the stages of TechCrunch. They're paraded around in Forbes magazine like geniuses, even though they're losing quite a lot of money. And the real skill here is understanding who's going to win. And it kind of comes down to this very simple key question, which is, can tech company X get good at industry Y before incumbent in industry Y gets good at technology? That's the kind of key question. It's quite simple when you put it that way. And we can see battles. Can Tesla get good at knowing how to make a car before Mercedes can get good at understanding electric vehicles and direct-to-consumer strategies and charging networks? And most people would probably think that Tesla are winning this battle. You have a company like HSBC, which is very good at making money from customers doing banking. But a company like Monzo, which is very good at making sublime customer interfaces. Who will win this? We don't know. But at the moment, HSBC are making quite a lot of money. And we have other battles, the battle between Airbnb and Marriott, where will a platform like Airbnb take over the accommodation industry before a company like Marriott can rejig itself for the future? But this question raises a really, really interesting point, which is, Airbnb is not really a tech company in a way. I mean, it's effectively a really nice website. It's an incredibly sophisticated website with a wonderful customer experience. But what it's really done is thought about modern consumer behaviors. It's thought about the fact that now we are happy to spend the night in a stranger's apartment because we trust Airbnb and we trust reviews. And you now realize that can create completely different business models where you don't even need to own the apartments, you don't need to clean them, you don't need to adhere to health and safety rules. So this question about tech companies is actually much better framed as innovative, customer-centric companies that understand the changing dynamics of the modern world, which is nothing like as pithy as saying a tech company. But it's really important that we realize that it's much less about the technology, much more about changing consumer behaviors and understanding. The second and the final part of this presentation is giving you a vague idea of 4 stages you should or could go through to change. This presentation itself normally takes a long time, so I'm giving you a very abridged version. The first part of any process, I think, is to try and be provoked and inspired into change. Now, you can look at a matrix like this, which I made up, so I don't know how robust and sophisticated it is, but you can look at your need to change in terms of the business environment. How much is that particular category going through change? And you can look at the consumer behavior changes at large in that industry. And you can see that the yogurt industry is not going through disruption. We are not consuming yogurt in wildly different ways. It's not being shipped to us by robots. If you're in the yogurt business, 1 year is probably quite similar to the next. I'm sure people in the yogurt business tell you otherwise, but they're just looking at things in the wrong way. And you've got an industry like department stores, where actually the way that we shop, what we look for in shopping is completely different. The entire retail sector has gone through enormous change. And the idea that department stores need to exist these days is absolutely ludicrous. And there are other versions here. So the automotive section, I think, is going through a massive business change, but I don't think people's behaviors have changed that much. Whereas something like education or housing has this enormous pent-up tension with people wanting radically different things and behaving in very different ways, but yet the business model hasn't really changed. And I think you can crudely use this yikes arrow. So the further you are to the top and to the right, the more existentially screwed you are. But I think that's kind of missing a trick in a way, because like Apple wasn't existentially screwed before it launched the iPhone. Like it was kind of doing it right. Like Netflix actually had a really nice business sending out DVDs by mail. Like they were doing great. Nescafe or Nestle had a really good coffee business, but they decided to invent the Nespresso and a completely different business model that makes $6 billion a year. It's amazing how we praise these tech companies that do software as a service, but if you sell coffee in tiny sachets and make tons of money from it, no one really cares. And what this really is opportunity-based change. It's that Apple realized they had the core competency, they had the imagination, they had the R&D budget to do something that was going to be a lot better than other people. And I think we would be much better off thinking about the modern world, not in terms of if we have to change, but in terms of what could we do that would be amazing. And if we think like that, our jobs become a lot more exciting. The second part really is to envisage your future. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to come up with my favorite thing, which is this little onion. So if you imagine companies as this onion with every layer forming a layer beneath each other, at the center of every company really is its business model. Like, how does it make money? Why does it exist? And it's that business model which leads to products or services and a process to make them. That's the thing that it does. And then when this thing is made or created or spread, we then have to market it. So we then have to look at things like distribution and pricing. And the outermost layer is the communications layer. It's the packaging, it's the PR, it's the advertising. And generally speaking, most companies tend to look inwards. And generally speaking, people only really see the bit at the outermost layers. People only really see the product and the packaging itself. And to really envisage your future, you have to think about what you make and how you make money. What is the business that you are in? And so far, companies have been very reluctant to do that because it raises all sorts of awkward questions. It needs departmental collaboration. So what companies tend to do is they operate to the outermost layer. Like digital broadly has changed where they advertise, It's changed how they advertise, it's changed what they measure, and it's changed what they can sell. But it hasn't changed that much. We don't buy radically different products through Amazon to that we would have bought 15 years ago. The skill really is getting much deeper. So digital should really change what you make. It should probably change how you make money. It should probably change how your staff work together. It should probably change the process through which you decide what to make. It probably changes how you make things, how you structure yourself, how you conceive your future. It should raise all sorts of very profound and existential, deep questions. And that's really a process that we should go through. And that's what my first book is about. It was looking at the changing world and this idea of what would your company look like if you built it today. The third part, so once you have sort of envisaged your future and reconfigured how you may make money, and maybe you decide that you won't and that you're in a great yogurt industry or you make wonderful wine, but it's good to go through that process to just check you're in the right space. The third part is to kind of design and to build the structure and the process that your company follows. So this is the next most outer layer. This is looking at things like budgeting and R&D and almost everything about the infrastructure of your business. Now, this is a bit of a simplification, but broadly speaking, we've gone through 3 eras of production. This was since the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Now, in the first parts of the Industrial Revolution, everything was really about execution. It was about scale. It was about owning as many assets as you could. You would have these vast factories that would turn out pig iron or steel or very rudimentary items. And the bigger you were, the more you had market dominance and you could decrease the cost of goods, and you wanted people that were the same. It was all about rigidity. It was a very kind of organized command and control thing where if someone died on the job, you could just bring in someone else because everyone did the same thing. The idea that your staff would be happy would be ludicrous. And then a bit later on in time, I kind of forget the dates, but we got slightly more sophisticated assembly type work where perhaps we were making more complicated things like cars or like aircraft. And this became much more about expertise. It wasn't about making as much iron as you could. It was about making a car that was better and that people would pay more money for. But it was still very much about production. But in this period, we created concepts like Six Sigma. We created concepts like management by objectives. And this became more knowledge-based work and more about people's ability to kind of manipulate things into little spaces. And everything was about how much value you could add, and everything was about constant improvement. And this really was about quality. And I think, and I may be over romanticizing a little bit here, but I think we've gone from the area of specialization to more the era of service, where it's becoming a little bit less about expertise and a bit more about empathy. And I think we're now really starting to celebrate the outcomes of what people make. We're starting to appreciate people who rethink. We're starting to have people who are kind of more loosely aligned around goals rather than this command and control structure. And we're looking at imagination-based value. A really good, neat little example of this is dog mode by Tesla. I don't know if any of you have a Tesla or if you have dogs or the two together, but dog mode allows you to leave your dog in the car while you go to the mall because the air conditioning will still work because it's a battery-powered car. And I don't think anyone's ever chosen what car to buy based on your ability to leave a dog in a car. But it's a very good example of what happens when you have people who are imaginative rather than engineers, because no person ever who's configured a car to go from 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds. No person who really thinks like that tends to care about the happiness of a dog, whereas a group of people that are customer-centric and imaginative and future-focused are more likely to think about opportunities like that. And in a way, this is all about the magic you can add. It's all about constantly learning. It's about innovation. And it's kind of about alchemy. It's about the magic that happens from really crazy thinking. So when you are trying to structure your company and design and build the processes that you need to follow, you can start thinking about these things. Again, this is part of a much longer presentation, but look at the structure, look at the locations you operate in, look at the technology you use to collaborate, the technology that you use to build and design and make things. Look at your investment strategy. What will you build? What will you borrow? What will you buy? Look at your data strategy. Look at your innovation strategy. How are you bringing in interesting companies? How are you working together with technology to share ideas? How are you open to innovation? How are you doing corporate venturing? There's tons and tons and tons of stuff that can be done in the area of innovation strategy and ensuring that your company is living and breathing and changing. And I'm going to leave you with this idea of creating a culture of innovation, because I think this is one of the elements that's radically underestimated. I think that somehow we assume that innovation is a department, or that companies with the best machinery operate well, or that places with a ping pong table and a free cafeteria are clearly innovative places, because that's what innovation looks like. And I think it's the culture of innovation that helps sustain the future. It's something that maintains your competitive advantage. It makes people happier. It makes you more clearly understood by the marketplace, and it allows you to charge a ton more money for your products. And this is really about transforming the environment in which you work. To some extent, I think culture really is the best behavior you celebrate and the worst behavior that you tolerate. And I think we forget how damaging, difficult, poorly intentioned people can be. And we underestimate the value of appreciation and celebrating people who represent the best values. Quite often when we do these things, we appear to do them in quite a disingenuous way. But I think we should never, ever forget that it's about what you celebrate and tolerate, which is key to this. I think it's vital, really, to generate cultures that are based on experimentation, that genuinely celebrate failure, rather than pretending to celebrate them and then explaining that it won't happen again. And continuous learning as well. There is no greater quality in potential staff for me than curiosity, which I'll come on a bit later on. A vital thing, I think, is to rethink assumptions. Before Dyson made the first vacuum cleaner, no one in their right minds would ever think that people would spend $500 or $600 for a vacuum cleaner. It was just crazy, the idea that people would care that much. Before Starbucks, the idea that coffee would be this thing you would pay several dollars for was completely insane for most of the world. It's vital that we don't use expertise as blinkers for possibility. And it's vital that you create a culture where people can ask really stupid questions. Because quite often stupid questions are stupid, but really helpful. I think we should be really interested in technology. Like, for all my dismissiveness about blockchain and NFTs before, I have read a lot about them because I am fascinated by them. But it's also far more important that we're obsessed with people and customers, because they're incredible. And our jobs become fascinating if we try to understand how technology will change them and what are the changing behaviors in the landscape. You know, you see a lot of trends decks that talk about robots. There are not that many trends decks that talk about income inequality. There are not many trends decks that talk about job satisfaction or religion or people's attitude towards dating. Like, those are really the technology trends we should be focusing on. I think we need to embrace the power of what technology makes possible. So it's slightly perhaps contrary to what I said before, but it's fascinating to think of how technology will change the fundamental things that we do, and use imagination to figure out what the cone of plausibility is for the future. And to just really, really embrace the art of the possible, like you mentioned before. I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly now. I think we need to avoid nice. I think somehow we've entered this environment where it's really important to be nice. It's really important to kind of collaborate. And if someone says something tricky, we put that on something called the parking lot. If people argue, we sort of presume that means that people are having a bad day. I think we need to really embrace respectful, robust, like data-oriented, well-intentioned tension. Because actually amazing things happen if you get an architect to argue with a structural engineer. Like incredible things happen if you get a psychologist to argue with an economist. And I think somehow, as long as we realize we're all well-intentioned and we're trying to get to a better place, I think it's okay to have a bit of tension in the world. We need to really, really embrace true diversity. This again is a topic I could talk about for hours, but I think at the moment we're going through quite a disingenuous and cynical period in diversity, where people are perhaps doing it for the wrong reasons. The fact is that we surround ourselves with people who make us feel comfortable because they're quite like us. And that's an incredibly stupid thing to do. Like all of the mind-blowing moments I've ever had in my life have been talking to someone wildly different to me. And we need to realize it's just incredibly stupid not to welcome tons and tons of different people from very different backgrounds who may look and behave and sound very different to ourselves, because it makes things way, way, way more interesting, and you just get to a much, much better place. And the fact that we still have to talk about this, I find quite strange. And that even comes down to things like university requirements. As far as I'm concerned, university is a very good way to celebrate compliant people and focused people and people with supportive parents. And it's a terrible way to filter for outrageously good people. We probably need to rethink recruitment and training. I kind of mentioned that before, especially training. We now have the internet, we can learn anything. If you work with someone good, they can learn how to code well enough to understand it in a remarkably short period of time. Just really, really rethink the role of training. Welcome outsiders' views, a bit like Marshall McLean with the container port, a bit like the discovery of DNA, a bit like the modeling of COVID. The best models have actually come from people with no real understanding of epidemiology, but a really good understanding of people and how they behave. We need to really, really welcome insiders' views. And this kind of leads to open innovation. It shouldn't really be everyone's role to innovate, but it should be everyone's interest and everyone's passion. And you should be creating a culture where innovation is just the way you do things. And that probably needs a lot of trust. Being creative is an incredibly vulnerable activity. We are now going through a period with a lot of people working from home. And the reason why that didn't happen before was not because we didn't know that Zoom existed. It's because apparently we didn't trust each other. We didn't think that people would work from home. We didn't think that people would be committed. We think that people would betray their freedom. And actually, if you trust people to be amazing, if you expect people to be wonderful, if you assume that people are well-intentioned and brilliant, virtually never will they let you down. I think we've always been led to believe that somehow the next big thing is going to come along. You know, a phone's going to get smaller and it's going to change our business, or the internet will get faster and it will make things possible. We have literally everything we need on the planet right now. Like we have fast enough internet, we have enough mobile phones, we have good enough AI, we have enough robots. Like everything we really have in the world to make an enormous difference, we have right now. And at the same time, the only thing we have is this moment, which is why I call my company All We Have Is Now, because I really want people to go out there and make a big difference. I want people to be optimistic. I want people to stop talking about the future and start creating it. And now is a great time to do that. And I think I'm just about finished on time to do a proper Q&A.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Sorry about my dog that just went crazy a few minutes ago.
I liked it.
The joys of Zoom webinars, right? And